To move forward, we have to get our facts straight. Guest host Bhaskar Sunkara of Jacobin Magazine hosts a conversation with his writers about what happened last November and what we can learn from it. All that and some footage from the Women's March from the Diverse Filmmakers Alliance. You're watching The Laura Flanders Show, where the people who say it can't be done take a back seat to the people who are doing it.
Hi, I'm Bhaskar Sunkara. I'm the editor of Jacobin Magazine. I'm here with Jonah Birch, who's a contributing editor at Jacobin and a graduate student in sociology at New York University. I'm also here with Kate Aronoff, who's the co-host of the Dissent podcast, Hot and Bothered, as well as a writing fellow at In These Times. I guess there's a lot of media narratives that are focusing on how Trump's a completely new and phenomenon, where he kind of just emerged out of a vacuum. He went straight from reality TV sets to the White House. But to what extent is there continuity between Trump and the Tea Party, between Trump and just the conservative movement, generally? Like, how do you see it?
Right. So there's a lot of bad narratives about how Trump came about. The sort of one you mentioned is that he came out of nowhere, right, and was just this sort of reality TV star and was preying on people's sort of worst impulses. But I think where he really came from is in the sort of priming that the GOP has been doing for years and years and years, most sort of acutely with the Tea Party. And so the base of the Tea Party looks very similar to Trump's base. It's a lot of middle-class white folks, and there was real organizing in the Tea Party in a way that I think gets a little bit ignored when we're talking about the narrative of Trump, which is that the Tea Party, had grassroots organizers, had this real sort of organic presence in many parts of the country, and this real sort of genuine energy, which of course was sort of bolstered by folks like the Koch brothers, by these sort of big think tanks and organizations truly moved into place when the Tea Party momentum sort of started taking off. And of course, as we've seen in the last couple of days, Donald Trump's cabinet, all of his sort of policy agendas have been, taken out of these playbooks. So he's not there are things that are genuinely new about Trump, and maybe we can talk about that later. But a lot of it is very standard, even down to his sort of economic plan, is things that the Republican Party has been doing for a very long time.
There has been over the past 2 years this kind of divide between the Tea Party inspired wing as well as a traditional Chamber of Commerce style business wing, and I guess that's best represented by people like Paul Ryan in Congress that are already butting heads on certain issues with Donald Trump. How deep are these fissures in the Republican Party? Do you think these are just kind of things that will be papered over? Will one wing win? Is there a possibility that the Steve Bannon wing of the Republican Party is really going to be in the driver's seat?
Well, I think the short answer to that is no. I don't think that there's a possibility that. It's not just about the Republican Party, right? What we're asking is whether the American ruling class and political establishment is going to lose power, essentially, in this context. And I don't think that's the case. Clearly, this is a moment of crisis, and that mainstream Republicans and really the entire American elite, the election of Donald Trump was not something that they were expecting or wanted to see happen. And clearly, you definitely see these splits developing within the Republican Party between, on the one hand, the kind of the dominant business wing that really, I think, controls the party, and sections of its base, and what Kate was talking about in terms of small business owners, white suburban middle-class professionals. I think you saw in the government shutdown of, was it the fall of 2013? I mean, that was something that business really did not want. And in the course of the primary in this election, there was a degree of disorganization, obviously, that meant that even though Trump was not their preferred candidate, they didn't get what they want. Still, nonetheless, I think to the extent that he is empowering people who are beyond the pale of mainstream politics, there are going to be lots of constraints, structural constraints, institutional constraints that are going to limit how far they're going to be able to diverge from the consensus in American politics.
But, we often talk about these fissures in the Republican Party, but it did seem, at least in the last election, that there wasn't the anticipated defections over from the Republican side to the Democratic side that Hillary Clinton and others were banking on. So I think a lot of people thought that, suburban women especially, lots of other traditionally Republican constituencies would swing in great enough numbers over to Clinton that the election would be, kind of a cakewalk. So how do you explain Clinton's loss? Not among just these constituencies, but just in general. We have lots of time, but I think initially, right after the election, there was a lot of emphasis on, Clinton did campaign enough in the Rust Belt, and she was a pretty bad campaigner. She didn't go to those states, and the Democrats didn't have a narrative around class or around speaking to people's concerns. But then lately, there's been all these other factors added in. There's been a lot of talk about Russian interference at the election and the hacking of the DNC and whatnot. So how do you weight, in your mind, all these different kind of factors, and which narrative is right? Is it contingent factors like her campaigning ability and the Russians? Is there something deeper and more underlying?
Definitely something deeper, more underlying. I think especially recently there's been this kind of move by higher-ups in the Democratic Party to blame what happened in the election on these outside factors, on Russian interference, on these hacks. And did that have an effect? Probably. I don't know. I mean, I think we'll see as these investigations move forward how big of an impact that actually had. But either way, whatever those investigations show, there are structural factors in the Democratic Party which made Hillary Clinton lose the election. And it's not sort of just a fault of her campaign. It's that the Democratic Party's strategy for the last couple of years, the way they've run campaigns, is to target as few people as possible. And some of the most kind of damning articles that came out in the days after the election, sort of trying to make sense of this, are about these algorithms that the campaign used to say we don't have to go to Pennsylvania because our algorithm says that we had that short up. They lost Pennsylvania by 60,000 votes. It's that they shouldn't have gone there was just a clear oversight that they didn't go to these places where Trump won so strongly. Was really just a flaw on the part of both the Clinton campaign and the kind of operating logic of the Democratic Party establishment, which says you can go after these very strategic constituencies, you can go after a specific demographic and really ignore everything else. And I think we saw this in the campaign, which is that Trump was telling a pretty compelling story about what America should look like, right? As bigoted, as racist, as xenophobic as that was, he wove together this narrative about what America should look like that really spoke to a lot of people, and spoke to a lot of people, not maybe because they're sort of in their heart of hearts racist, so those people did vote for Trump, but because they're sick of the way politics has worked, and people hate politics. Trump doesn't look like a politician, and so cast against Hillary Clinton, who's this sort of embodiment of establishment politics on both sides of the aisle, it was really easy for him to just sort of trounce her. I'm 24. Hillary Clinton has been on my TV screen for as long as I can remember, and so the fact that people wanted to vote against that is not surprising, I don't think.
Yeah, and I think there's a narrative that's emerged. Obviously, that the election was thrown to Trump by essentially poor working class white people in these suburban areas. And I know Jacobin published a very good piece by Kim Moody that goes through some of the numbers about exactly who was voting for Trump. And I do think it's there was obviously a lot of disillusionment. People were not satisfied with Hillary Clinton or with lots of people with either of the candidates in this campaign. It's important to say that that first of all, most poor working class people in this country don't vote, or a huge number don't, and that the base of the Trump campaign really is these small business owners and the sort of white suburban professionals, and that his electorate was drawn disproportionately from higher income groups, and I think that's an important thing to get across, because I think there can be this very elitist. It's these poor, uneducated people who they're so irrational, they're so crazy, and that's a dangerous message, certainly for anyone who's interested in progressive politics.
You're listening to The Laura Flanders Show with guest host Bhaskar Sunkara and Jacobin Magazine. Stay tuned, and to find out more about Jacobin or this program, go to lauraflanders.com. Thanks.
So I guess it does come down to, like Jonah was saying, that it comes down to turnout. For the Democrats weren't able to rally and actually like convince people to affirmatively vote for them. Even if those voters were rightly repulsed by Trump. And obviously, if things haven't been going very well for you, voting for someone whose main claim to fame is, I've been in politics for 30 years, it doesn't make, complete sense. But that falls like, what's our solution? Is it just a matter of, is it a matter of like reframing or pushing the Democrats in more the direction of like a Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren? Is it something else?
I think at this point, given the sort of realities of what a Trump regime will look like, it's sort of an all of the above strategy. I think there's real need to support things like changes within the Democratic Party leadership to support progressive candidates. But I think there's also an argument for building institutions outside of that and really figuring out what it is that's going to get people excited, what's going to get people engaged in politics, whether we frame it like that or not. But I think we really need to sort of double back down on the power of social movements. It's kind of one of the nice things about being outside of the election is that we can kind of refocus on the things that actually do make structural changes in America, which are not always sort of party politics. And so, looking to what's happening outside, looking to building outsider pressure, while also, holding the fact that we can sort of contest for these super local races like the Tea Party did in, the lead up to the Republicans taking back so much power, both at the federal level and at the state level.
And if I could just say, I think that there is a part of the problem in American politics is that if you are progressive or if you're on the left, really the electoral politics around the Democratic Party it seems like is pretty much the only thing that's been on offer for a long time. So of course, there are movements that go up and down, but the institutions and the organizations of the left in this country have been so weak over the last 4 decades, in some ways even longer. That it's really limited our ability to have an impact at the level of policy, at the level of the institutions of American capitalism, and that's something I think that there's an opportunity to start to build something to the left right now. Ironic as it is, one thing that the election of Trump has done is certainly it's galvanized a layer of people who are really disillusioned with the direction of politics. A lot of people who were maybe inspired by the Bernie Sanders campaign, people are looking for something. I also think that there's a degree to which, it's opened up some splits within mainstream American politics, and that potentially can open up space for something.
Concretely, is there a historical analogy or something you look to for, inspiration or for an example of how kind of movements can develop in these times? So we could think about, I guess, the anti-war movement that emerged, but all these movements seem to, in the end, go back to let's just elect some Democrats at the midterm, which again might be better than having Republicans elected at the midterm. But again, they kind of like seem to ebb and flow and don't develop a deeper root in American society.
Right. I think one of my favorite examples to look to, and it's tough because a lot of these huge movements which have driven these big egalitarian shifts in American policy have been under Democratic administrations. But one that actually, I think one of the ones that's worth looking to is the Bonus Army March in the aftermath of the Great Depression, where I think 10,000 or 20,000 unemployed veterans just picked up, moved to Anacostia Flats in Washington, D.C., and for 2 weeks straight lobbied Hoover to pass a bill that would sort of give pay to veterans that they were promised, and they were out of work, and so we're looking for this. So the demand itself, it gets a little bit lost in what that was, but I think they kicked Hoover out of office, basically. They came back at some point later, and Eleanor Roosevelt brought them tea when the bonus RB came back for a sort of second push. And so, that was 10,000 people, and that kind of pressure kept up in the aftermath of the Depression, to the point where, you can talk about the sort of limits of the New Deal. There were plenty of limits of the New Deal, but it did save a lot of people's lives, and it did, I think, change the way we can think about, what's possible when movements kind of push. And today, I think it's easy to forget that the left is actually stronger than it's been in a very long time in the U.S. Let's not forget that 12 million people voted for an avowed socialist in the primaries, and that we've seen over the past 5 years this huge resurgence in social movement activity, from Occupy Wall Street to the Movement for Black Lives to the ongoing sort of fight against the Dakota Access Pipeline. People are paying attention to movements in a way that we haven't seen in a very, very long time. And so I think it's really easy in this moment, especially for those of us on the kind of progressive left end of the spectrum, to forget that, but to really pick up that mantle and say, look, we have avenues available to us which we haven't had before. That's an opportunity for the left, especially when, as we were talking about, there's this huge power vacuum in the Democratic Party.
You're listening to The Laura Flanders Show with guest host Bhaskar Sunkara and Jacobin Magazine. Stay tuned, and to find out more about Jacobin or this program, go to lauraflanders.com. Thanks.
So Kate mentioned the New Deal period, but one thing that period had that we don't have today is some sort of real insurgency within the labor movement and the really birth of that movement. Do you see anything positive coming out of that in that direction? And it looks like with Trump and the Supreme Court nomination, it looks like we might see the devastation of public sector unionism. Is there a possibility that there might be some silver lining out of this as far as new organizing models, a new anything?
We could do an entire show on that. That is a big question. I think it's worth saying that things don't look good in that department, and and that there has been a long-term weakening of organized labor in this country, and over the last 4 decades. I do think, and other people, Kate probably knows more about this than I do, that there's some effort to develop a kind of progressive labor politics right now, and and even in the last 5-6 years, we've seen some things that I think are positive signs. The Chicago Teachers Union strike obviously was something that was very inspiring for a lot of people. I think the larger problem, we've seen over the last decade and a half, there have been some big protest movements at times. I mean, the movement against the Iraq War was enormous. The organizing around immigrant rights. Part of the issue with those movements is, that as I've experienced them, is they tended to go up really quickly and then collapse really quickly without leaving a lot of organizational expressions in their wake. And that's something that we have to figure out how to overcome. On the left, I mean, we have to figure out how to build something that's durable.
One thing that's worth mentioning, too, is a lot of the people I was talking to right before the election, when the sort of assumption for a lot of people was that Clinton would be elected, movements were kind of making this turn toward thinking about what independent political power looks like. There was a sort of, there weren't any illusions about what a Clinton presidency would be on the left. And so even before the election itself, people are starting to think about, what does it look like for movements to run their own candidates? What does it look like, potentially even to have our own party or something like that? So that question has been raised a lot, and I think there is sort of a recognition, especially among a kind of new generation of activists, to think about, how do we solidify these gains? How do we make sure when there aren't, all these people in the streets that we can, be in the halls of power, as it were?
It's hard to find young anarchists anymore, which as a rightward moving social democrat, I think is fantastic. But
it's not 1998 anymore.
Right. It's not 1998 anymore. All the urban gardens, Sanders has conquered them all. So but I guess what is there to be optimistic about the next year or two, or maybe a more materialist way to put it is, where are the promising things that we could double down on that you see kind of existing now or potentially emerging in the next year or two?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to spin this as sort of a positive, but this power vacuum in the Democratic Party is sort of exciting. And the fact that there are so many people, as I said, polarized against Donald Trump, who could, be, I think, galvanized to fill that in. Campaigns like Keith Ellison's for Democratic leadership, I think, are one thing to be excited about. But more so, I think just we have a lot of people who are angry and want to do something. And so the left historically has not been good at providing those people on-ramps. But I think there is this real desire now to get those people plugged in, both to sort of movement politics more generally, but also to more formal politics. I think there's a lot of people looking at the Tea Party model, looking at the sort of grassroots insurgency, which can happen of running for school boards, running for city councils and things like that. And I think the real hope, I think, in the next couple of years is going to be at places like the municipal level and at the state level, where you don't have kind of the same constraints you do at the federal level. I mean, I think the federal level, there's going to be a lot of defensive fights, especially on things like the environment, to just, save basic institutions that could, potentially stop the end of the world, and that's not an overstatement. But to look to what can happen in cities, and we've seen in Europe there's been a sort of municipalist movement that we can take some lessons from. We should leave others, but there are kind of things like energy municipalization, taking back public power, things like creating sanctuary cities, creating places where the city government actually goes against the federal government and refuses to persecute immigrants in the way that Trump is calling for.
Jonah and Kate, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
The day after the inauguration of Donald Trump, a lot of people didn't just wonder what to do next. They got up and got into the streets. The Diverse Filmmakers Alliance captured these participants in women's marches in New York and Washington, D.C., and asked the participants in the marches, what do they do next?
We didn't want this. This was not the will of the people.
The people that made this happen are not the majority in America.
We are much better people than the person who happened to get elected. He does not represent the populace.
So to the rest of the world, I say he doesn't represent what we want in our future.
This is the real America. This is what's really happening. By showing, these feelings, getting them out, that maybe we can come together.
This whole presidency has just brought out the hate in this country, and this is the perfect time for everyone to stand together and love and be kind and unite so we can have a better country.
For minorities, for women, LGBT community. There's a lot of people out here today, clearly. So there's a lot of people that have our backs.
We are not going to wait 4 more years. We are going to fight.
Because silence equals death.
And I'm not going to let him destroy everything I believe America is about.
I hope the people don't lose their fire and their passion.
It's very easy to sort of be with a movement when it's when emotions are heightened like this, but it's the long game that's important here. It's about every single day being educated, being engaged in your community.
Going out, getting engaged locally, finding organizations to join with.
Art making, organizing, and getting down with your local community.
Personally, I'm planning to start being part of the community board in my city.
Out of Bushwick, Brooklyn, we've already formed a health coalition working for bills and laws.
I work now as an educator, so I'm working with a few of my coworkers to create this group after school that works towards social justice.
I do believe that people, women, have the power within to make the change that will really matter and that will be lasting.
Women's rights are here to stay.
We're not going to sit back. This is a stand that we're taking. Complacency is no longer an option.
Yes, we can! Yes, we can! Yes, we can! Yes, we can! Yes, we can!
For more information about the Diverse Filmmakers Alliance or Jacobin Magazine or the other activities we cover on this show, come to our website, lauraflanders.com, and support this programming. We only get by with your help, so thanks.